Hey, Chef Ro here. Today I'm going to continue on our Foods for Native American Heritage Month by making a soup with the Three Sisters. Now, just about every tribe across the entire country had some sort of legend around these three plants that grew together. The Three Sisters are corn, beans, and squash. And depending on where they were in the country, the different tribes would have a different variety of beans, a different variety of corn, a different variety of squash. Winter squash, summer squash, it kind of depended on where they were living. The reason why these three plants work so well together is that the corn grows tall and gives the bean vines something to climb. And so it's a support system for the bean vines. The beans produce an extra amount of nitrogen into the soil that helps feed both the corn and the squash. And the squash grows along the ground and prevents the weeds from growing because it covers the ground, so it provides good ground cover for weed prevention, and it also helps keep the soil moist. So these three partner plants, if you want to call them that, grow together beautifully, so often they were also eaten together. I'm going to do a simple soup. I'm not making it fancy. I'm just sticking to these three ingredients. I'm going to put a little bit of herbs in there just for flavor, but think of this as a base soup that you could use for just about anything and add it in as you like, and you can modify the ingredients as you like as well. If you would like to feed between 4 and 6 people, these are the ingredients you're going to need. I have all my ingredients laid out here. I'm using butternut squash and pinto beans, but you can use any type of bean and any type of squash you like. The way I'm going to cook this is going to be how you would use a hard winter squash. If you are using a summer squash, you would only saute this for just a minute, add the liquid and add everything all at once and just let it heat through. You wouldn't need to simmer it for as long as I do. Also, I'm using canned beans here. If you want to use dry beans, it will taste better, the texture will be better, but it's going to take a lot longer. Ideally, you would soak the dry beans overnight, and you would actually put those in the pot first before the squash, let them cook all the way through, then you would add your squash and your corn. If you want to use dry beans, it's just a slightly different way of cooking. If you use canned beans, it's just going to go faster, but some people really don't like the texture of canned beans as much because they tend to be a little bit on the overcooked side. If you do use canned beans, make sure that you rinse them very well. You don't want all that sodium and all of the goo that's around the beans to go into your soup. It'll just kind of get in the way of the flavor of that soup. So, ingredients are ready to go. I'm going to show you how we're going to make this soup. Here in my pan, I have a little bit of fat. Now, I have a little rendered animal fat that I had from something else that I'm using, but you can use any fat that you like. Vegetable oil, avocado oil, any kind of fat will work here, okay? First things first, we're always going to add onions before we add anything. They need to saute first and get nice and translucent or see-through. Okay, so once your pan is hot and your fat is hot, you're going to add your onions. Now, the one thing that nobody ever tells you, and it's too bad that they don't, because it makes your food taste much more delicious, is that every time you add something to the pan that you've cut, you want to add just a pinch of salt. That way we've seasoned each step as we go, and it'll have more flavor at the end. So we're going to give this a little bit of a stir, and then we're going to let it cook on about a medium heat until those onions do get see-through and translucent. You can see here that my onions are getting see-through. They have not browned. The idea is to not brown them, just to kind of sweat them out a little bit. And now we're going to add our butternut squash cubes, or whatever squash you're choosing. Now, because butternut squash makes me think of the fall, I'm going to add a little bit of sage in here because that's my herb that makes me think of fall. But you don't have to add anything if you don't want to. This would still be quite delicious. You could also add some chilies in here if you like, or some dried oregano, or cumin, or coriander, or whatever spices you like would be fine. And this is where they would go in. Now, if you noticed, when I was doing the onions, I was not stirring very often. That is because the more you stir, the more you release the heat into the pan instead of letting it stay in the pot to do its job. Also, everybody has a habit of stirring things and then piling it up in the center like this. I can't even do it with this much food in here, but make sure that you have it spread out because your entire pan wants to cook. Let it. Okay? So, now that I've just got, I can smell that sage a little bit. If you wanted to add a little garlic in here, now would be the time you would do that. Okay? And once it becomes nice and fragrant, now we're going to add our stock. I'm using veggie stock because this is a vegetable soup. If you were using meat or something in here as well, you could also add chicken stock or beef stock if you had that meat in there. Otherwise, as my French chef always used to ask me, why would I want my squash to taste like chicken? Okay? I want it to taste like squash. So, we're going to season that stock a little bit. If you're using homemade stock, you need a lot of salt. If you're using store-bought stock, you only need just a touch. Okay, we're going to give that a little stir. We're going to let this come all the way up to a boil, then let it roll down to a simmer. Okay, once it is simmered, we're going to simmer it for cubes this size. You're only going to need probably about 15 to 20 minutes to get those cubes soft. Once they're soft, I'll show you what we do next. My soup has been simmering for about 15 or 20 minutes, and my squash is now tender, so I can move on to the next step. You can see here that the liquid has reduced a bit, and notice it's not boiling rapidly. You don't want to boil it rapidly or else the liquid will reduce too much and then you won't have any left. And an easy way to tell if your squash is done is to take a piece and just squish it against the side like this, and see how easily that's squished? It means it's ready. Now, if you would like a creamier soup, you could take this and puree some of it in the blender or all of it in the blender. It's up to you. But back in those days, they wouldn't have had a blender to use, so they would have eaten it more like this. Okay, now we are going to put in our beans and our corn, and we're just going to let those heat up. As soon as those have heated up, I'm going to show you how we finish this. This only took a minute or two. The frozen corn was already thawed. The beans were already cooked. All I needed to do was just let that hot liquid heat them up. We don't want to keep cooking too much longer or else the beans and the corn will be really overcooked. They're already cooked, we just needed to heat them. So now we just have to check for seasoning. And the only reliable way to do that is to use a spoon and take a bite. But remember, no double dipping. And make sure you get some of the liquid also that you're taking a bite of to make sure that you've seasoned it properly with salt and pepper. My soup needs quite a bit of salt and pepper here. It's woefully under-seasoned, so I'm going to add a little bit of salt. I'm going to add a little bit of pepper. I'm going to give that a nice stir, and it should be good to go. You can always taste again if you want to make sure your seasoning is correct. But remember, not the same spoon. No double dipping, okay? Especially if you're going to serve it to somebody. Now that our soup is done, I'm going to show you what we do. Luckily, this soup is not hard to serve. All you're going to do is take some ladles full and put them right in your bowl. Look how beautiful that looks with all the different colors. The three sisters in our bowl in harmony. Okay, make sure you get some nice broth. You can garnish it with a little extra fresh chopped herb or spices or something that you had used in there. Or if you were going to puree the butternut squash part of it, you could leave a couple of chunks to use as a garnish. It's up to you, but realistically, this looks like a nice hearty fall bowl of soup. Hopefully you've enjoyed learning about the three sisters in Native American culture, and hopefully you will enjoy this recipe with your family.